My boyfriend and I share an apartment in London with our dog, which is a husky. My boyfriend is in the film and television industry and used to work from home most of the time, so he would generally look after the dog during the day while I was at work. Take him for walks, keep him company, stuff like that. However, recently my boyfriend was given a new job opportunity in the center of London, much higher pay and much more related to what he actually wanted to be doing. But obviously this meant that he would be out of the house more often, so we had to change our schedule for walking the dog and stuff like that. We decided on alternating days since this seemed fair. So 2 or 3 mornings a week, I would now get up early before I had to be ready for work and I would walk the dog. Now, I'm really slow when it comes to getting ready in the morning, so I had to get up super early on my days to walk him, usually around 5 or 5:30 a.m. I would walk around for 15 minutes to the park near our apartment and let him off the leash in a large field-type area that was enclosed by tall hedges on all sides so that he could run around. This one particular morning, back in November of 2015, something happened that scared me more than anything I can think of. With it being close to winter, it was still very much dark out when I left at that hour of the morning. It was cold and had been raining quite heavily during the night, so everything was wet and still stank of damp. I was groggy, as usual, and not wanting to be there at all. The park creeped me out at the best of times. It was dark and always deserted at this time. There were street lights, but they're sparse and that old kind that gives off that dull yellow light that just makes everything look even creepier. The enclosed area where I let my dog off is usually pretty dark because there are no street lights actually in the space itself, as there's one at the entrance gate and one on the other side. I should say that there was a small side road running along one side of the field with a row of garages that I think belong to the apartment buildings just behind them. It also isn't the nicest area. The park itself is nice, but you do get the occasional drunk passing through. They wander through the park to find somewhere quiet to drink more or just go to sleep. Thinking about it, I probably should have never gone there alone in the dark, but the dog needed a walk and there wasn't anywhere else close by. Plus, I figured that it was morning, not late at night, so who's going to be out mugging people at that time in the morning? Anyway, back to the story. I had let the dog off and he had run to the far end of the field to go sniff around and do dog stuff, I guess. I stayed as much as I could at the better lit end of the field, but after a few minutes I decided to follow him to make sure that he wasn't eating stuff off the ground or something like that. He's mostly white, so I could still make out the vague shape of him moving around in the darkness. As I approached the darker end of the field, that's when I heard it. It sounded like somebody coughing or retching, like they were throwing up violently. I turned around quickly and scanned the field. No one was in the enclosed area itself, but just over the hedges at the far end, I spotted the silhouette of a man's head and shoulders, illuminated in the light from the street lamp. He was standing on the side of the field with the garages, one hand up against the wall, head down and obviously being sick. I could tell it was a guy from the sounds he was making. I figured he was just drunk, probably didn't even know I was there, and just carried on with what I was doing. Still, I was a little uncomfortable with him being there and hoped he would just leave soon. Man, was I wrong. A minute or so passed and I began to hear him mumbling to himself indistinctly. I chanced another look over at him, and this is when I began to get kind of freaked out. I had to quietly move a little closer towards him in order to verify I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. He had vomited down the wall and onto the floor and was now proceeding to scoop up what he could of the vomit with his bare hands and wipe it all over his body, his face, and his hair. He did this all while mumbling to himself and chuckling occasionally. This guy was clearly not all there. I decided that it was time to go. I turned my back on the man and called for my dog to come to me. This was a big mistake. I began walking towards my dog, all while calling him and looking back to keep an eye on the crazy man. I stopped in my tracks when I realized that he had now turned to face me. He was reasonably far away and I could only see his head and part of his torso over the hedge, but the street lamp made it clear that he was definitely facing me. He knew that I was there. I froze momentarily, paralyzed with a sudden panic in the pit of my stomach, and then snapped myself out of it. I grabbed my dog, who had wandered over to me and was sniffing around my feet, and put him back on the leash and made a beeline for the gate. I looked back over to the other side and was relieved for a moment because I could no longer see the man. My relief was short-lived though when I realized that he had not gone away, but had just moved out of the light a little and was now crouched down slightly behind the hedge. I could still hear him mumbling though, and I'm fairly certain he was still watching me. I was almost at the gate when I began hearing him rustling through the bushes, so let me try and paint a picture of where he was in relation to me. Imagine a square. The gate is in the top left corner and he was in the hedges at the top right corner. I reached the gate and began fumbling with the sliding locks. Suddenly, the rustling stops and with dread in my heart, I look over to see why. I really wish I hadn't done that. I wish I had just opened the gate and walked quickly in the opposite direction. He was now standing in the field with me. I couldn't see his face as he was in near complete darkness, but I could see his body outlined in the light from the street lamp. He looked tall and thin. He was breathing heavily and still mumbling to himself. Once again, I was momentarily unable to move out of fear, but only for a second. I bolted, and to my horror, so did the man. This creep set off at a terrifying speed towards me. I slammed the lock on the gate open and dragged myself and the dog through, throwing it shut with a crash after me. Seconds later, I heard it open again and could hear loud footsteps behind me. I ran, faster than I ever have before. I didn't look back, not once. I didn't dare. Sprinting like I was, you can reach the main road at the park entrance in less than 5 minutes. Only then, on the well-lit street with cars and people on their way to work, did I pause to look behind me. He was gone. I was so relieved, I immediately burst into tears, panting and sobbing like a maniac. I sat down at the bus stop to compose myself for a moment, and then hurried home to tell my boyfriend what had just happened. Seeing how scared I was, he suggested calling the police, but nothing had actually happened. Whether the guy was just trying to scare me or had worse intentions, I don't know. But one thing's for sure, I'm never going back to that park when it's dark again. So, I live in South Florida between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and it is hot as all fuck here, the real field temperature hitting 110 and 115 regularly. So, I do most of my walks in Pokemon Go playing at night, typically between midnight and 4 a.m. Even though my area is getting pretty ghetto, I don't really have that many issues. My family has a reputation and I'm a large, tall, intimidating looking male. I also go out armed and I know what streets and places to avoid, so I'm usually perfectly fine out there on my own. My normal route has me going down a well-lit, typically populated street with 2 shopping plazas with 24-hour businesses inside of them. I hit 2 Pokestops there, go back down my street 3 blocks to another Pokestop and gym by a park and a police substation, then in front of a school, down to a very dark parking lot in front of another park with another Pokestop and gym. The last of those has a community center at it with large glass doors where some light shines out onto the sidewalk in front of it. And there are some parking lot lights when they're actually working, which isn't often. The sidewalk in front of this building has hedges that block it from view from the parking lot, which up until this week when they were trimmed down to waist level were maybe about 5.5 feet tall. I was sitting out on one of those concrete parking meters capturing the gym to get my defender bonus and decided to drop a lure since I'd be there for inventory and leveling my newly captured gym. About 10 minutes into my lure, I noticed something moving near the hedges in the light from the doors. I thought maybe it was a cat or an owl, as we have a lot of those in this area, so I ignored it at first. Until about 15 minutes into my lure, I got up to stretch my legs. I did some minor stretching and as I was sitting down I realized the shape in the light was there again. Keep in mind, the light is coming from behind and the parking lot lights blow ass even when they are working, so this figure was mostly shadowed. All I could make out was the top half of a human torso and head peeking out around the side of the bushes, just fucking staring at me. I just stared back and after what seemed like an hour, but was probably only a minute, the form vanishes behind the bushes. I'm sketched as fuck by this point, so I pull my knife from my belt, open it, and put away my phone. Standing up, I call out, "Who the fuck's out there?" All I get in return is a fucking giggle, not like a little kid's giggling, a fucking adult woman's giggling. So I call out to her again. Quit fucking around, you're gonna end up getting shot doing that shit. She just laughs more and sticks her head out from behind the bushes from a bit further down. Keep in mind, as I've said, the area isn't the greatest. We have hookers, druggies, homeless people, and even combinations of the three wandering around here at all hours of the night. I'm figuring this is probably some drug-addicted chick high as fuck and decide I don't want to stick around. So I start backing out slowly, watching the bushes. Her fucking head peeks out from the bushes in the original spot, and then her fucking body. She starts following me slightly faster than I'm backing out, just giggling and shambling out at me. I back out to a better lit area and yell out for her to fuck off, and she just stops and stands there laughing and pointing. By this point, I decide that if she follows me and makes a move, I'm getting stabby. Otherwise, I just want to get home. I turn and walk fast back in front of the school area that I mentioned previously, and started heading towards the other Pokestop by the police substation, figuring I'd stop at the substation and if there was an officer out there, just give them the heads up that there's some crazy chick by the park and community center. Then go down some random streets to get home, making sure I wasn't letting anyone follow me. Turns out, she had followed me, very slowly. When I checked behind me at the Pokestop on the corner, I saw her looking out from behind a tree. I booked my ass to the substation and spoke to the cop on duty, then followed through with the rest of my plan. I haven't seen that creepy lady ever again, even though I head out there every night. I'm assuming she was a druggie or a homeless crazy person and that the police chased her off on my tip. When I was 14, I would spend the summer holidays away from school at home. In the small village I lived in, this meant I mainly spent my days on my own while my parents worked, either watching TV or playing The Sims for the most part. My parents were generally out of the house from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. I was raised to never answer the door to strangers. However, where I liked to sit in the living room, my chair was next to the window anyway, so I could always see people on the street and they could always see me too, I guess. One day, I was sitting down watching daytime TV when I noticed a man walking down our street. As our street is a dead end, I normally recognize everyone who walks down it, but I had certainly never seen him before. He was tall, thin, and unshaven. He was wearing a hooded jumper with the hood up and sleeves rolled up, revealing tattoos on his arms. He was carrying a large duffel bag and looking closely at each house as he passed. As I sat watching him, I was clearly in full view of him too. He started to pass our house, and when he saw me, he smiled and turned to come up our driveway. He came up to our front door and knocked. I knew I shouldn't answer the door to someone I didn't know, but he had seen me, and at 14 I was afraid of being rude to an adult. So I obediently went and opened the door, just a crack. I peeked around the door and said hello. As he spoke, he pulled the duffel bag around to the front of his body and asked me if my parents were home. At this point, I thought he would probably leave if I said no, but instead he stepped towards the door and unzipped the bag. Well, the thing is, I've just got out of prison. I want to do the right thing, you know. It's so hard to find a job, so I'm trying to sell some things. He started pulling towels, handkerchiefs, and other junk out of the bag. The word prison made my heart skip, and I quickly mumbled something about having no money and closed the door. He stood there on the step for a minute, still talking to me about being able to help. So I went upstairs and waited for him to leave, which he did eventually. I soon settled back down to watching the TV and forgot all about the encounter. At 5 p.m., my parents came home and they took the TV, so I went up to my room. A little while later, there was a knock at the door. I came onto the landing and peered down as my mom answered the door. She opened the door to 2 police officers. They asked if anyone had came to our house that day. My mom said that no one had, and that was when I remembered my visitor from earlier. I came down the stairs and said that someone actually had been at the front door earlier. Seeing I was young, the 2 police officers asked to come inside and talk to me. They asked me to describe the man and the conversation that I had with him. They seemed really worried and kept telling me not to worry and to be honest about what happened. Once I had told them what had happened, they asked to speak to my parents on their own, and then they thanked me and they left. I went straight to my parents asking them what was going on. My mom explained that shortly after the guy had come to our house, he had gone to another girl's house. She was in the shower and hadn't answered the door when he knocked. Apparently, he let himself into the house and walked upstairs when he found her in the shower and sexually assaulted her. With my description and the evidence from the girl, they tracked the guy down. It turned out he had just been released from prison for a similar attack on another girl. I never answer the door when I'm alone now, and I also won't shower when I'm home alone.